Hello, today we are going to learn about adjective clause. An adjective clause is simply a group of words with a subject and a verb that provide a description. A sentence with an adjective clause can be seen as a combination of two sentences. For example, John is a man. He works hard. John is a man who works hard. In this example, we can see that John is a man is combining with he works hard with an additional who in the middle of the sentence. An adjective clause will meet some requirements. First, it will contain a subject and verb. Second, it will begin with a relative pronoun who, whom, whose, that, or which, or a relative adverb when, where, or why. The word that begins an adjective clause usually comes directly after the noun or pronoun that the clause modifies. Let's go through some examples. First, which. Pizza, which most people love, is not very healthy. Second, whose. The people whose names are on the list will go to camp. Third, that. Fruit that is grown organically is expensive. Fourth, who. Students who are intelligent get good grades. Fifth, when. Grandpa remembered the old days when there was no television.
Hello, my name is Monica Wong and I'm going to explain about relative pronouns as subjects and relative pronouns as objects. Relative pronouns as subjects consists of three components, which are who, which, and that. To refer to people, we use who and that as the subjects of verbs in adjective clauses. For example, the Charles are the people who bought the house. In this sentence, the Charles are the people refers to independent clause, while who bought the house refers to dependent clause. The adjective clause modifies the noun people. Who is the subject of the adjective clause. Another example, Sam is the man that lives next door to me. That is the subject of the adjective clause. When relative pronouns as subjects refer to things, we will use which and that as the subjects of verbs in adjective clauses. For example, Matt is the subject which is the easiest for me. In this sentence, Matt is the subject is the independent clause, while which is the easiest for me is the dependent clause. Which is the subject in the adjective clause, and the adjective clause modifies the noun subject. That is less formal than who or which. The verb in an adjective clause agree with the noun or pronoun that the clause modifies. For example, there are many people who have taken this personality test. In this sentence, the verb take agrees with the noun people that the clause modifies. Another example, this test is the one that is best known. We also need to be careful of, we cannot use double subject in an adjective clause. For example, extroverts are people who like to be with others. We are not allowed to use they in between of who and like because there is only one subject in an adjective clause. Next, I am going to explain about relative pronouns as object. Relative pronouns as object contains of four components, which are whom, who, which, and that. When we refer to people, use whom, who, and that as the objects of verbs in adjective clauses. For example, Mr. Pitkin, whom I mentioned yesterday, is my boss. In this sentence, Mr. Pitkin is the object and whom refers to the object of the adjective clause. Same goes to the other two examples. Mr. Pekin was the man who I mentioned, and Mr. Pekin was the person that I mentioned. Whom is generally used only in very formal English, whereas who is used in informal English, and that is the least formal. To refer to things, we use which and that as the objects of verbs in adjective clauses. For example, the test which I took was difficult, which refers to the object of the adjective clause, while test is the object. Same goes to the other example. That refers to the object of the adjective clause, while relative pronoun which is more formal than that. Conversation and informal writing, you can sometimes omit the relative pronoun if it is an object. For example, Mr. Pekin is the man who I mentioned. Who refers to the object of the adjective clause. When the relative pronoun is an object, we can eliminate it during informal writing and conversation. The other example will be, the test I took was difficult. There's an extra information. The verb in an adjective clause agrees with the subject of the clause, not with the object. For example, the Wangs are the people that Sally sees frequently. We use sees instead of see because people refer to the object of the clause, and the verb in an adjective clause only agrees with the subject of the clause.
Next, I'm going to introduce about whose and where. Whose. It is used to introduce an adjective clause that indicates possessions, used to replace his, her, its, their plus noun. Adjective clause with whose can modify people or things. For example, Ken is the man plus we met his wife. The full sentence is Ken is the man whose wife we met. Next, it's a theory plus its origins go back many years. The full sentence is it's a theory whose origins go back many years. Next, Harvey, whose house we are renting, is a lawyer. Be careful, whose cannot be omitted. Next is where. Use where to introduce an adjective clause that modifies a noun of place. Where replaces the word there. Be careful. Use an adjective clause with where only if you can restate the location with the word there. Do not use an adjective clause with where if the location cannot be stated in this way. For example, this is the restaurant plus we ate there. The full sentence with where is this is the restaurant where we ate. Next, Chihuahua is the town. I was born there. The full sentence with where is Chihuahua is the town where I was born. These two sentences can be used word where because the existence of the word there. As we know that where can replace the word there. Where can be replaced by which or that plus a preposition such as in, at, or for. In this adjective clause, which or that can be omitted. For example, this is the building where she works. We can replace the sentence with the word that and preposition in. The sentence is, this is the building that she works in.
Now I will explain when to use when. Use when or that to begin an adjective clause that modifies a noun of time. For example, I can't think of a time when I wasn't happy. I can't think of a time that I wasn't happy. These two sentences are using when or that to begin the adjective clauses that modifies the noun of time. Next, you can omit when and that in the adjective clause. A sentence without when or that is informal. For example, I can't think of a time I wasn't happy. Next, an adjective clause that distinguishes one person or thing from another is called identifying or essential. The clause is not enclosed with commas. For example, the tramp who claimed to have a limp sprinted after the bus. This sentence does not have comma because the adjective clause who claimed to have a limp is essential to identify the tramp. It is the information that we need in order to understand who or what is being referred to. Without the adjective clause, we would not know who is the tramp. An adjective clause that adds extra information but does not distinguish one person or thing from another is called non-identifying or non-essential. The clause is enclosed with commas. For example, my brother, who claimed to have a limb, sprinted after the bus. This sentence is enclosed with commas because the adjective clause who claimed to have a limb is an extra information about the noun, which is my brother. It is not a necessary information, so we do not need it to understand what or who is being referred to. We still know who is my brother that we are talking about even without the adjective clause. Be careful. You can omit relative pronouns which are that, which, who, whom, and whose only in identifying adjective clauses. You cannot omit the relative pronoun in a non-identifying adjective clause. For example, the man you met on Friday is Tariq. This sentence has identifying adjective clause, so it can omit the relative pronoun. Next, that's Tariq, whom you met on Friday. This sentence has non-identifying adjective clause because it has comma after the noun that modifies, and the relative pronoun whom is needed in it and cannot be omitted. You cannot write the sentence as that's Tariq, you met on Friday. This shows non-identifying adjective clause because it has comma after the noun Tariq, so the relative pronoun need to be added in it. Don't use that as a relative pronoun in a non-identifying clause. For example, the Gomez test, which I took a long time ago, has proved to be accurate. We normally do not write it as the Gomez test that I took a long time ago has proved to be accurate. You can use which informally to refer to an entire previous idea. Example, Helen is hardworking, which impresses me. In this sentence, Helen is hardworking refers to the entire previous idea. Next, in formal writing and speech, use a noun at the beginning of a that or which clause. For example, Helen is hardworking, a characteristic that or which impresses me. In this sentence, characteristic is the noun. That is why the relative pronoun that or which is used after the word characteristic.